Welcome to Mysteries of Superstition Mountain. I'm Larry Hedrick, where we bring the past into the present for our future viewers. Today we have another great story by Hank Sheffer.
Here it is, my favorite season of the year. I got to tell you though that the high desert is so different from my original stomping grounds. Where I'm from, we had to put up with the blustery cold weather and snow and sleet and rain, and I don't do that anymore. That was back on the eastern seaboard. And as a friend of mine, Don Donnelly, used to say, I wasn't born in Arizona, but I got here just as quick as I could get here. Now, when I look east from my 50/50 ranch, my view is filled up with the Superstition Mountains, if you haven't guessed already after watching our episodes here. And frankly, I never get tired of that view. More often than not, I find myself reminiscing about the stories and the legends and whatnot that I've come to really love out here in this area that surround the Superstition Mountains. So many of these stories deal with the gold seekers, the diehards that come out here and they're looking for gold, and it's just because of their fascination with this one itinerant old prospector by the name of Jacob Walls. Now, it was true that he carried a small poke of gold with him just about everywhere he went, and he always had that when he went drinking, because apparently he drank pretty well when he got together with folks. But there have been an awful lot of persons who have gone out there to search for the same prize that he had, and they never met with the luck that he did. And so many others, well, they paid way too high a price for their looking for the gold. Others just wound up as a pile of bleached bones out there in the deserted mountains somewhere to be forgotten. Some were found, but not all of them. Over the years, as is the case with many of the stories, the line that separates fact and fiction has really become blurred. In fact, stories that I heard 40 years ago have gotten to the point where I hardly recognize them at all when they're told to me today. And then we add on top of that the fictitious imaginings of the creative writers. Their stories of today get mixed in with all the other ones, and so they just become part of this grand pile of stories, and whether they're true or not doesn't seem to make any difference. But that's another story altogether. What I want to do today is I want to tell you a story that I just read in a magazine not all that long ago about a happy-go-lucky adventurer by the name of Weihnachten Glucklich. Evidently, he wasn't from around here, as everybody said. As folks found out right off, that was quite a handle for a man who simply preferred to be called Billy. Nobody knew much about Billy, other than he seemed to be quite a pleasant, educated, though shy sort of fellow. His shyness made him appear to be standoffish, but that really wasn't the case at all. He really did enjoy his privacy, though, as he spent a lot of time on his own up there on the mountain. In his early ramblings around the mountain, he discovered a small abandoned stone cabin. Right nearby the cabin was a little stream running through a clump of shade trees that made the most delightful sound as it traveled down the rocky stream bed. The cabin itself was a bit ramshackled, but for all intents and purposes, it was still in a fix-upable condition, as he would say. It would suit his purposes just fine. It wasn't long before people began to realize that this Billy was a pretty handy fellow to have around. They learned that he could fix just about anything and was always happy to lend a hand to anyone who needed help. They also saw that when he came to town, he always had trinkets and things he made out of old horseshoes and nails and such. He also had pretty little jewelry pieces he made with the shiny rocks he found in his stream. He always had things to sell so he could make a little money for his supplies. But most times he just gave things away because it made someone else's day a little brighter. Billy just seemed to like making people happy. After a while, when Billy had gotten to know folks a little better, he didn't feel quite so anxious around them as he had before. Folks who had figured him to be just one more luckless prospector were learning there was a lot more to this Billy fella than they had originally thought. Nearly a year passed. The hot summer months were giving way to the cooler breezes of the fall season. During that time, Billy started to notice that while the people all seemed to be pleasant with one another, none of them ever really stopped and talked to each other. That didn't make any sense to him. He just figured that's the way they were, I guess. Billy, on the other hand, had become a lot closer to a few people in town anyway. He knew the barber, Jack. They talked about all sorts of things together, probably because barbers know lots of stuff. However, the barber's trade was never really applicable where Billy was concerned, even though his hair and beard had grown considerably and it was turning gray. The fading color was probably due to Billy's tough lifestyle up on the mountain, Jack surmised. Then there was the mercantile. The storekeeper was a jovial character with lots to talk about, kind of like Jack. This was another favorite place because besides the storekeeper, Billy could meet and visit with pretty much everybody at one time or another during his visits to town. But his most favoritist place of all was the blacksmith shop. Billy and the smithy got along admirably. They were so very much alike, those two. Moreover, Smitty always had old horseshoes, nails, and scraps of leather that were just pure treasures to Billy. The things Billy's imagination allowed him to make from those throwaway things was nothing short of amazing. Making them always made Billy happy, and lots of other people too, as it turns out. Well, Thanksgiving finally rolled around, and Billy was invited by his old buddy the Smithy to share his Thanksgiving celebration. Nothing fancy, mind you, but the blacksmith was a man who kept to himself much like Billy did. And even though Smithy enjoyed his privacy, he worked day after day doing things for other people. Sure enough, he was paid for some of his work at the blacksmith shop. He did have to make a living, you know. But the other little things he could do for folks that they couldn't do for themselves, well, that was important for him to do. It just seemed to make him happy. To Billy, sharing that Thanksgiving with Smitty just seemed to be the right thing to do. Well, the days continued chilling off as December and winter really settled in. Billy needed to bundle up to make his treks into town. The trip wasn't all that far, but the cold in the air made it feel that way. Usually his first stop was with his friend at the blacksmith shop, and then off to the mercantile for supplies. The storekeeper noticed that along with his other supplies, Billy had been buying an unusually large number of candles. That didn't seem to make much sense to the storekeeper because it's not like candles can keep you warm or anything. I mean, that just seems silly. But that was his business. Oh well, there were always lots of white ones, but if available, any other color candle was grabbed up in a hurry. No matter. He took whatever he could. Then off he'd go back to his little cabin up on the mountain. The first 3 weeks passed by all too quickly that December. And as it is all over the rest of the world, the kids, yeah, moms and dads too, we're all chomping at the bit for Christmas to arrive. It doesn't really matter if it's a warm desert landscape or a frosty cold scene with snow everywhere. Decorating Christmas trees and gift giving is the same no matter where you are or where you go. Christmas is Christmas. Well, as it turns out, the hectic week before the big day arrived, Billy came to town, and contrary to what the townsfolk would have ever believed, he explained to the ones on the street that he wanted them to gather on Main Street. He had an announcement he wanted to make. They all wondered, what could it be? no one had the first clue. Well, the appointed time chimed in the tower at the end of Main Street, and the crowd began to gather. Nothing like this had ever happened before. As Billy approached the gathering, some of the people were pondering what he could possibly have to say. Even after all this time, they really didn't know much about this Billy Glucklich, or whoever he was. Maybe, just maybe, they were about to find out. Somebody fetched up a crate for Billy to stand on, and he hopped up on it and waited a second or two for the folks to settle themselves down. Billy then proclaimed that it was his wish that everyone come up to his little stone house on Christmas Day. And if there were some folks unable to make the trip on their own, then maybe their neighbors could get together and help them out. It was important, he told them. He had something he wanted them to see and share. The crowd looked back and forth at each other in disbelief, or confusion, whatever it was, that such an invite would be coming from this shy, gentle man they had known so briefly and knew so little about. Well, sir, I have to tell you, Christmas Day arrived right on time, just like it always does. It was a bright, shiny, new day with crisp, clear, fresh air. It was the sort of day that just makes you feel good about everything. The townspeople all began to arrive that afternoon, just as Billy had requested. When they got there, they found the place to be a peaceful, comforting sort of a place. They could hear the sound of the brook babbling down the wash through the trees, all of which were decorated with these brightly lit candles. And the front door of the stone cabin was all decorated with a beautiful wreath of greasewood boughs, which was also adorned with lighted candles. And the small window next to the door now had a large red candle glowing invitingly on the sill. What the people saw was beyond anything they'd ever seen before. And it was certainly more than any of them could have imagined, especially way up here on the mountain. They began chattering cheerfully with each other about what they saw and heard in the midst of this truly wonderful little place. None of them were paying any attention to how quickly the time was passing, though. So quickly, in fact, that it was not long before all the candles had burned themselves right down to little puddles of flickering wax, and the deep darkness that the mountain can bring was rapidly coming on. Overcome by their enthusiasm and gaiety with the beautiful decorations and happy conversations they were having with each other, everyone had completely forgotten about Billy. They all looked around, but Billy was nowhere to be found. And all of a sudden, it was really getting dark. It was telling them it was time to be heading for home. In silence, the people all bunched up together as they headed on down the mountain toward town. It had been truly a magical Mystery Mountain Christmas that Billy had shared with them, even though they never saw him. Well, sir, as the story goes, this Billy Glucklich was never seen again. However, there are people to this very day, at this very same time of year, who will tell you you can hear him off in the distance over the Superstition Mountains saying, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night." And to all of you, our faithful listeners, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from all of us right here on Mysteries of the Superstition Mountain. Ho, ho, ho. Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.